Yeah, we can do elementary school.
Good evening and welcome to the Monday, June 11, 2018 Board of Education meeting. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So with the board's consent, what I'd like to do is move item 7 up to this part of the agenda. This is going to be our last report from 2 of our student representatives off to college, so we understand. So I'm sure you've got other things to be doing this evening, so why don't you go ahead with your report.
Okay, so starting from A.W. Cox, 4th graders have been enjoying many end-of-year activities, including Early Guilford Day, and A.W. Cox students enjoyed participating in Day Week and loved making the gratitude balls. From Calvin Leet, students have enhanced their learning through a variety of recent field trips. They visited the Eli Whitney Museum, Beardsley Zoo, and the Guilford Free Library. 4th graders have also enjoyed Early Guilford Day on May 22nd. They participated in many colonial-era activities, including doll making, hearth cooking, blacksmithing, and colonial games. The students, staff, and parents were dressed in clothing reminiscent of colonial times. And finally, from Calvin Leet, Field Day was a huge success last Friday with fun activities and great weather.
Okay, and at Guilford Lakes, the end of the year picnic will be happening this Thursday from 5:30 to 7:30. The students also performed in the Spring Song Fest on Friday, June 1st, which was amazing. They performed, the theme of the concert was A Taste of Broadway and dances from around the world. And so they sang songs from musicals such as Annie, Lion King, and The Sound of Music. And they also performed dances from Germany, Russia, Israel, Mexico, and the U.S. The kindergarten class had 2 visitors, a weatherman, and also they had an ambulance which visited the students, and they were able to tour and explore the equipment inside of the ambulance. The 4th grade class took a trip to Baldwin and to Guilford Free Library, and the 1st grade class went to the zoo. At Melissa Jones, they had a week of the circus, basically, and they had the mime, a juggler, and acrobatic, and they taught them various skills such as walking on sticks, juggling, balancing, and plate spinning. And at the end of the week, the whole school performed this, had a mini circus for the community, and also the kindergarten class did Red Nose Week during the last week of May, and the 3rd graders are ending the school year by collecting things for the animal shelter in Brantford. And the 4th grade class organized and collected toiletries for the Veterans Hospital in West Haven. Finally, at Melissa Jones, 3 students from the high school presented their capstone projects, and which they were really excited about.
From Baldwin Middle School, the 5th and 6th grade band concerts are being held tonight from 6:30 to 8:30. And coming up, the 5th and 6th grade orchestra concerts are being held on June 14th, and the 5th and 6th grade chorus concerts are being held on June 19th. As well, from Baldwin, the Stepping Up ceremony from 9:15 to 10:30 is being held on June 22nd. From Adams Middle School, all of the 7th grade class has been taking geology studies field trips in the past month of May. And on May 10th, the National Junior Honor Society induction was held very successfully. And I am told that the 8th graders are looking forward to moving up to the high school.
And from the high school, the IB students have had a rigorous but enjoyable first year and are looking forward to both the challenge and excitement of their second and senior year. Also, we had an excellent spring sports season. Girls lacrosse reached the Final Four of the state tournament. Boys baseball also reached the Final Four of the state tournament. And both boys and girls tennis made deep runs into both the SEC and state tournaments. And sports banquets will be held throughout June, celebrating the achievements of these student athletes.
More from the high school, the jazz band, symphony orchestra, and concert orchestra concerts was held last weekend, or last week, I should say. The jazz band performed at the Strawberry Social on the Green, and the percussion ensemble, wind ensemble, and concert band concert will be held tomorrow in the Performing Arts Center.
Okay, and so as the year comes to an end, the seniors have been going through their activities, including Holiday Hills, the senior breakfast at Woodwinds, senior prom at AquaTurf, which was a lot of fun, and the senior award, senior scholarship, and the Sideliners Athletics Award also took place within the last 2 weeks. And also, final exams will begin on Monday, June 18th, and end on Thursday, June 21st. Graduation will take place on June 22nd at 6 p.m. on the Green. And with our theater arts department, we received 21 nominations for the Halo Awards, in which we won our musical, School of Rock, won Best Contemporary Musical, and several other individual students won awards throughout that.
And lastly, since this is the last meeting for both me and Dorcas, I would just like to say thank you to the entire board, to Mr. Bloss and Dr. Freeman, for having me for the past 2 years. It's been a pleasure working and presenting in front of all of you, and I'd just like to thank you for the knowledge that I've gained from this and the experience.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I'd definitely like to thank you for allowing me to serve on the board. It's been great working with Brendan and Noah, and as well as the various principals and Mr. Masenti, and learning more about the school and just representing the student body in general. So thank you, and I'm glad that I've got the chance to do this, and look forward to being able to use the skills with working with my professors later in life.
Terrific. Well, if we want to, Mr. Kazin will join me over here. We have, if you'll just join us over at the podium. So for all of your hard work, you get a certificate. Dorcas, we really appreciate all the work you've done with us. You've been a terrific representative of the Guilford student body. We've had obviously some very interesting and challenging issues before us. We know you're going to be a great success moving forward. So on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you very much and wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you.
Likewise, Brandon, besides having a name that is very similar to my son's with the addition of a D, I want to echo 2 words that you use, knowledge and experience, in thanking us. We thank both of you, all of you, for the knowledge and experience you give. You're much closer to having the pulse of fellow students, and we draw quite a bit on every monthly presentation that you give. So we know you're going to do terrific things, and we just want to give you this certificate of recognition, and thank you very much for everything you've done.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let's get back to the agenda then. Item 3 on the agenda is action on the minutes of 3 meetings, regular meeting, special meeting, and a workshop meeting. Is there a motion to approve the May 14 regular meeting minutes?
Second?
Any corrections, changes?
I just wanted to correct one item. When we were talking about changes to graduation requirements, it said that I made a comment about not having a fair assessment. What I really meant is we were talking about decile rankings and the potential to that to change at the high school. And my point was that colleges now currently review our decile rankings, and they can be slightly misleading because we're such a high-performing district, not that we have unfair assessments.
Okay. What would the language, what would the correction be?
I can.
We can submit something. Okay.
And if I may, that exact same paragraph, page 4 at the very top, the sentence, they are working to enhance graduation requirements for the junior class, that's actually already happened. So I would suggest crossing out they are working, and enhanced graduation requirements are in place, starting with the junior class, something to that effect.
Okay. Any other clarifications, corrections? All right, all in favor of the motion to adopt?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay. Next is the special meeting, which was the board meeting on May 23rd, 2018, to get input, public forum for input on school start times. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Any corrections, changes?
Yes.
Yeah.
On the bottom of the first page, the last line, with their start times in the morning changing from 3:25 to 3:30 p.m., I think there's something missing. I think it's from 9 to 9:10, and end of school from 3:25 to 3:30.
3:30 or 3:35?
3:35.
3:35, yeah.
Yes, there's some, yes, that's
And 9 to 9:10.
Okay,
in 9 to 9:10, right?
right, okay. All right, with that correction, any other corrections or clarifications? These are very thorough, obviously, and not
This is a
intended.
But a lot.
lot of,
yeah.
yeah.
You know, technically, all we have to record is votes, frankly, but that's fine to have this much detail.
No, it's helpful on a public
On
forum.
something like this, yeah, it
Yeah.
really
Okay,
is.
fine.
It's
Yeah, yeah.
really,
All right, has a motion been made and seconded?
Yes.
Yes.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? All right. May 29 workshop meeting at Guilford Lakes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
so, second?
Okay, corrections, changes?
Yes, number 1, under call to order, Gary Kazin is the vice chairman, I am the board secretary.
True,
But you did call the meeting to order.
I did call the meeting to order, I did do that.
that's correct.
It's the ranking official.
All right, any other
Right.
corrections?
The head honcho at the time.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
I abstain.
all right. Any other?
Abstain.
Okay, Mr. Sands and Mr. Kazin abstained. All right, item 4, public forum for topics on the board agenda. Please.
Evening, Rich Bello, I live at 5 Carriage Hill Drive. I also teach physical education at Guilford Lake School. And unfortunately, due to a death in the family, I was unable to go to the public forum about school start times. So when I saw that it was on the agenda tonight, I thought I'd be able to come speak for a few minutes, if that's okay with all of you. Just to give you a little background on myself, I've taught at the high school. I've taught at the elementary school for 18 years. I've coached in town. I've been a student, a graduate. So I've kind of experienced all the parts that you're trying to gather, and I know Dr. Freeman and his staff are working so hard and diligently to try and find out what's the best way to do this. I know it's a difficult topic, but I think we want to do it right the first time and not just do something to say we did something, if it's pushing something 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it may be. So it's just my personal opinion. I would like to see us, even, I know we have a group of a population that's very strong, that they want something done yesterday. And I know that's a very difficult thing, but I think there's still more to look at. I think at the elementary school level, at least, between 8:30 and 8:50, we already have kids getting dropped off that are standing there and waiting for us. It's difficult when we don't start, we don't let them in until 10:09. So if we're pushing that back by 10 minutes, that population of kids might increase. Dismissal time, today, the last bus, I think, pulled out at 3:40 in the afternoon. So it doesn't take much for a bus run to get pushed 5 minutes or 10 minutes in our town. We live in a town that's huge, but you get an accident somewhere, you get a dismissal that's late at the high school or Adams or Baldwin, and as you all are very aware, the way our buses are structured, it's this big snowball approach that affects our youngest kids and us at the elementary school. So when you look at 10 minutes, when you look at it on paper, it's 10 minutes. In reality, it's not. It can be much longer than that. So I just ask that you kind of keep that in mind as you do what you think is best for our kids. About 10 years ago, I'm not sure, Mr. Bloss, you may know better than I, but I think it was about 10, 12 years ago, we actually added 8 minutes to the elementary school day. We had a 3:17 dismissal.
That's right.
And we pushed it to 3:25. And at the time, Dr. Forcello's rationale was that the buses were struggling to get there at 3:17. And if we did 3:25, they would be there, lined up, ready to go. You know, I mean, it's not exactly, they're not lined up ready to go when we get there. I mean, there's days that are just longer than others. So we've already, you know, over history, we've added time to elementary day. And now we're going to add possibly another 10 or 15 minutes, whatever we decide to do. So I just wanted to give a little history there, especially for some of the board members that maybe haven't been on the board for so long, because I think that's an important thing to keep in mind in the history of what we've done. I have a future kindergartner who'll go to Cox next year, so a little guy who loves being outside and being active, and you know, being home in the afternoon with them is important, and I want to see them have that opportunity. So one thing, I know this is kind of open up a Pandora's box, so I'll apologize in advance, but Dr. Freeman's always talked about, as he's gone through this process, you've said how, wow, I've really started to look at all these different pieces and how broad this thing has become. About 12, 15 years ago, we had a proposal to build a 7-8 school on the property adjacent to Baldwin. Maybe we need to be looking at the bigger picture and what's a little further down the road, and either looking at that proposal again and dusting it off a little bit and seeing if that's something that can help us in this issue we're facing, or even possibly looking at the Adams site or that Baldwin site and saying, do we look and see if there's feasibility to do a 5-8 district school and see how that affects busing? So I know that's a huge, huge, huge thing, but if we look at everything in the process, I think there are things that we should at least look at. And I'm not one to come to public meetings and do a lot. I only kind of do it when I think I would like to share something I think matters. I love working in this town. I love living in this town. That's why I've been here for so long, and I'm lucky to work for all of you, and I enjoy doing it every day. And I know this is a very difficult subject, and I know, as you said, Mr. Bloss, there's people that are going to be happy, there's people that are not going to be happy. But just do what's best for all kids, because I know that's what you're all here for, and that's what's in your heart of hearts. That's why you do what you do. But do what's best for all kids, not just 1/3 of the student population that I think has kind of taken the center of the discussion. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I wish you the best of luck, because I know it's a difficult pill to swallow. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a point of clarification? Mr. Bello, you
Yes.
had mentioned that students are arriving between 8:30 and 8:50 a.m. I'm assuming you mean their parents are waiting
they're
with
getting
them?
dropped off
Okay.
early. And that's something for years is always an issue, and I'm sure every school and every level is dealing with it,
Sure.
in their own way. And it happens for a variety of reasons, some that we know, some that we don't know. But I think that's something to just keep in mind that, is it happening because parents are trying to get out the door and they don't have options? I mean, I know before and after care is there. I know that's the option. That's what they should be doing. And I all know that we all know what we should do, but sometimes people don't do what they should do. They just do what's most convenient for them. So, I know it's something the administration's worked on to address, and it's something that we deal with, but it's just something to keep in mind that 10 minutes, 15 minutes may have another effect on that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Rosemary Arbuckle. I live at 135 Lake Drive, and this really has to be looked at before you make any decisions, to make sure that you're making the right decisions as far as the children are concerned with the delayed start times. I'm also a bus driver, just to put that out there. But you also have to look at we have a new company coming in, right? And they still have to learn the town, because they don't know anything about this town, really. But also, when you're that 10 minutes, sometimes roads are closed, and then that adds times onto the bus run. It could be due to weather issues, like trees are down, wires are down. Like 77's been blocked several times because of trees coming down with wires, or somebody getting into an accident with their car and taking down the pole. This has a big impact on some of the runs. So if you turn around and say, oh, well, the buses will get there when they can, but if they're running 10 minutes late, then that's going to put them 10 minutes later to the next school, and then if they get holed up at the next school, then it's going to make them even later for the elementary run. Okay, so everything really needs to be looked at before you make any decisions. I'd rather have you come up with a good plan, one that's solid, that will help, get you your time that you want, but I'd rather have it done the right way the first time around. So that's all I got to say. I've been trying very hard not to talk at these meetings, but have a good day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Others? Okay. Ms. Best, you are the reviewer, are you not?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So we had the opportunity to discuss expenditures and revenue for the month of May in our operations meeting just prior to this. But I would say, for the record, that our expenditures for the month of May were $4,281,905, and that's about 82.64% of the budget. We did note in our operations meeting that in terms of revenue, the excess cost grant came in May, and that was totaled at $285,354,000. I think that's all we have, right? Okay. Unless there's any questions.
Questions? Anybody? We did talk about this to some substantial extent in the Operations Committee meeting. All right, so is there a motion to approve the expenditures for the month of May 2018?
So moved.
Second.
All right, any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item 6 is communications. I think we all received, I'm going to say, I don't know, I'm going to say about 15 emails on the start time issue. Fair? Okay.
Yep.
Many expressing concerns about the impact on elementary schools. Many, actually, the first speaker kind of crystallized there. You're right. There is a group, and there are some of them here tonight that think we should have done something 4 years ago or 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and there are many people who think that we are moving too quickly and haven't looked at everything, and there are some people who kind of in the middle. So, we get it. We understand the concerns. We understand what people are trying to bring to our attention, and we're just going to have to try to balance it all out and do what we think is right. But other communications other than start times? I don't think I had any.
No, that was a single topic I saw.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, item 8, Superintendent's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Boss. I'll keep my report brief this evening, but I do want to bring a bit of good news to the board's attention. Last year, the GFFE went beyond their usual grant awarding process and initiated what they had called the Superintendent's Challenge. They have invited me these last 2 years to look at all of the grants that have been awarded, to look at the grants that were written to receive those awards, and asked me to identify a grant within there for additional recognition. And so this year, the GFFE and I identified the Guilford High School SAT Day grant. And the reason, there's a number of reasons why that one was selected, but one is because the name is misleading. Joel Reben wrote this grant on behalf of Guilford High School, submitted to the GFFE, and the focus of the grant was twofold. One, the administration at the high school, the staff at the high school was looking at a way to administer that SAT to every 11th grader in our school and do it in a way that was more accommodating to the test takers, so that they were taking the assessments in their classrooms in a room that felt comfortable to them, rather than being loaded into the gymnasium so that the rest of the school day could continue to go on around them. It was, in fact, a way of looking at the stress and anxiety that would be generated by that high-stakes individual test and do it in a way that was more accommodating for the 11th graders. But we have 9th, 10th, and 12th graders coming to school that day as well. And so again, the administration and the staff at the high school created a specially scheduled day for all of those other students where there were high-interest, essentially, assemblies that were happening. So while the 11th graders were taking their SAT in a more conducive setting, the 9th, 10th, and 12th graders were cycling through a series of presentations on topics like mindfulness, cyberbullying, and other high-interest, important topics for them. And what we generated was a day that responded to the necessity of that assessment that the 11th graders have to participate in, and turned it into a day that was healthier and more enriching for all of the other students as they moved through those high-interest presentations. The grant that GFFE afforded specifically helped to underwrite a speaker, Scott Driscoll, who was addressing the issues around internet safety and cyberbullying. Scott Driscoll is a presenter that we have used in the community before to present to adults, but had never spoken directly to a student group in the past, and GFFE made that available. So I was happy to recognize among all the awarded grants, the Guilford High School SAT Day grant for special recognition, and along with that recognition, GFFE awards an additional $1,000 to Guilford High School to spend at their discretion. So the representatives from GFFE were here last week. They presented that check. It was a great big version of the check to Mr. Macenti and to Mr. Reben. I was pleased to be part of it and wanted to just bring it to your attention and again congratulate Rick and Joel on the work that they did and that the whole staff here did around that necessary assessment. And that was the only piece that I had for my report tonight.
Okay. Questions or comments? Okay. Board agenda. So let's move up item 9.7 and discuss this. The way this is noticed on the agenda is to discuss for possible action school start times. That means that there may be a vote tonight, there may not be a vote tonight. It just depends on what the position of the board is and if we think we need more information. But I want to, before we get started, I know that one of the things we talked about after the last meeting was to get some more information about what was happening in Greenwich.
Yes.
And I know that there was some feeling that Greenwich had either gone very, very well in implementing a much later start time, and then there was some feeling that Greenwich had some roadblocks or some speed bumps, I guess, whatever you want to say. And Greenwich is a very different town in many respects. They spend much more than we spend on transportation. It's physically about the same size, but a much more robust infrastructure, things like sidewalks and so forth, except in the northern part of town. But in any event, what can you tell us?
So I spoke with Dr. Jill Gilday of Greenwich just last week, I believe. I did report this conversation out to the Start Time Task Force as well. Greenwich moved to a significantly later dismissal time of 3:15.
For high school.
For the high school. Dismissal time of 3:15. I believe that's a significant move from them. As we've mentioned a number of times, start time is rarely the issue. It's the dismissal times that become the sticking point for many of these conversations. Dr. Gilday explained to me that there was significant concerns related to that late dismissal time connected significantly to athletes who were missing instruction. Their community saw an enormous spike in requests for outside of school tutoring that athletes were engaging in outside of school. Number of parents coming to board meetings, counting up the expenses that they had incurred for tutoring as a result of their students being dismissed early to get to away athletic events. This year, additionally, they had worked with an outside consultant who had identified significant efficiencies in the bus runs, and as the year unfolded, they found those efficiencies they didn't last. They were not able to maintain those efficiencies. So they ended up having to put additional buses on the road. They ended up having to add supervision in certain locations. They drew a significant amount of attention in the press recently for their proposal moving forward into next year. There had been significant conversation in the community about rolling that back, going back to the original start times. I believe that the headmaster at Greenwich High School had written an op-ed on the idea of reducing, shortening, or going all the way back to the previous schedule. They found a creative response in that they are going to engage at the end of the day in what is being described as an opportunity block. It's essentially a flexible period, and we have flex periods like that in some of our middle and elementary schools here in district already. So core instruction for the day will conclude at 2:45. Students will, however, remain on property until 3:15, and they will be engaging in that time in high-interest, student-centered club activities, teacher-run activities. Essentially, it becomes a free period where students can engage in a variety of different activities. My understanding is that athletes in season will be excused during that period, not required to stay. I believe it's my understanding that students who drive to school will be excused, not required to stay. And they will now have 3 staggered bus runs, one that leaves at 2:45, one that leaves at 3:30, and one that leaves at about 5:20 or 5:30 after afternoon activities occur. I asked how they were able to achieve that, and they will be shortening all of their credit-bearing instructional blocks by 2.5 minutes. That seems like a little reduction, but if you multiply that across a school year, that is 8 contact periods that students will be losing in those core instructional blocks. So 8 math classes, 8 social studies classes, 8 English language arts classes, when you add up those 2.5 minutes across 180 days. So right now, I don't know if that will be implemented next year. That is the plan on the table at this time. But I'm also aware that that Greenwich, I want to be really clear, I'm aware that Greenwich is going through some administrative changes at the same time. So I'm not sure what that will look like into next year, and have offered to stay in touch with Greenwich as they go through this change.
Could, a clarification question, just so I understand it. So this it sounds like a half hour, this opportunity block is not replacing a period of the day. The day is being essentially kind of smushed, and then it's added on top of. So if they had a 6-period day, they still have a 6-period day and then a half hour at the top.
My understanding is that class periods are going from 58 minutes to 55.5 minutes. So the instructional day is being shortened, and this opportunity block is the top layer. It's the last thing to happen in the school day, but it's not one of the core instructional periods.
But they're I mean, 2.5, does that add up? 2.5 minutes times 6 periods, you're still,
No, there are
other
additional
time.
changes as well. They're also
Okay.
shortening passing time. There's a number of changes.
Okay.
But
I don't need all the details.
Yep,
I'm just trying to understand
The instructional change was an important
okay.
one.
When did do you know when their middle and elementary schools get out?
I did not bring their full schedule with me.
Okay.
Did you discuss transportation implementation issues on the horizon, or an
So
actual?
Greenwich incurred a $1.5 million increase in transportation costs when they made this change. Now, their budget is significantly larger than ours. Their overall budget is almost 3 times the size of ours. But they made a significant investment in this change. And then, as I said, we're not able to hold on to some efficiencies that we're trying to offset some of those costs.
So the 1.5 million includes the buses they ended up having to put back on?
I believe that's the total cost, Mr. Sands, but I'd have to go and check. Essentially, they brought in an outside consultant, and they worked on finding efficiencies in their bus system. They worked to run the system more smoothly. And I think to a comment that was shared earlier, it looked great on paper, and they found out that when they ran the system, they simply weren't able to meet the published pickup and drop-off times. And to fix that system, they ended up returning some of the buses to the road that they thought would be savings to offset the overall cost.
So one of the, and I should say, it is true that our new bus company is not even on the job yet, but they have worked very closely with the task force on this issue. They have been at every meeting or almost every meeting, and they have, their advice has been sought and has been followed when they had ideas about transportation. They think that there can actually be some efficiencies in the high school run in the morning.
Correct.
Allowing, we talk about start times, but actually the real key issue for anybody who takes the bus is when they get picked up in the morning, because that's going to dictate when they are able to go to bed and wake up, and at what time they have to wake up. So the company is quite confident that they can start these some of these runs later.
Correct.
And so that's I think you've indicated that they're thinking that they may be able to build in 10 minutes.
Correct. We
at
believe
that
it.
end.
Yep. 10-minute savings in the AM pickups for the high school run. We believe that we are confident in that efficiency. And just to be completely fair, we do have a manager who is on payroll, and they do have a temporary office in Guilford, and they have been working for us, even though their full contract has not started, including attendance at a couple of our start time task force meetings.
So, I'm sorry, I have another question, if I may, which is that my assumption, I shouldn't say understanding, I guess my assumption about drop-off at the high school being early is that there are a number of factors that happens, but on paper, I would think that in order to push those, in order to have buses arriving here later, it would be the middle school run that would have to be tightened, not the high school run.
Correct. So we had high school buses that were dropping off 35 minutes before the start time of the high school. There was then an additional window that represented that middle school run.
Right.
We know that we can drop students off 10 minutes closer to that middle school opening and still have students there early, but not as early for the high school opening, and allow those buses the time they need to get back out on the road. But you're correct. It's 10 minutes closer to the middle school opening, not 10 minutes closer to the high school opening, right? Because if we only slide the middle school's 10 minutes and their start time, but slide the high school 15 minutes, it's that middle school opening that we and that created some confusion at some of our task force meetings in tracking to whom those benefits would accrue.
Okay.
So one of the other, what the recommendation of the task force is still what we were talking about at the last meeting. That would mean starting the high school 15 minutes later, and then the other schools 10 minutes later.
Correct.
However, I should have mentioned this during communications. Dr. Moore wrote an email suggesting that there is a way with either no expense or minimal expense to compromise some on the at least the elementary school opening and closing times, dismissal times, and that is specifically he thinks, after talking to the bus company, that the high school could start at 7:40 as the task force has recommended, and that the middle schools would start 10 minutes later as recommended by the task force, but that the elementary schools could start 5 minutes later and dismiss 5 minutes later. So effectively, a position in the middle of what the task force recommended and what is currently the practice. So this has come up in fairly recently, obviously. I know that was a topic of some conversation at some meetings. So I guess, and I sort of hate to, it was a proposal, at least by Dr. Moore. I don't think it has it wasn't voted on by the task force, was it?
It wasn't voted on by the task force. I think what had happened was we were all very concerned, and especially myself as a board member, with the feedback that we were getting from the community in terms of changing that elementary school start time, and recognizing that that creates more of a hardship for some than we had originally anticipated, as well as affecting, students in the afternoon with activities and what have you. And so we sat down as a task force and really wanted to recognize those issues that were being brought to us, and asked Chip Dorwin, our Director of Transportation, as well as the manager from Specialty Transportation, whether or not we could do anything to affect that or minimize the impact to the elementary schools. And they both indicated that they thought that was possible, that there were, other efficiencies to be had, perhaps, that we hadn't recognized or thought of, and it sounded very promising to us, at least to me. And so I, in thinking that might be a really wise compromise, getting us, for the high school students, that additional 75 minutes of sleep for drivers and up to 125 minutes of sleep for those that take the bus. Would be realizing something that is a tremendous benefit and gets us closer to where we'd like to be, and anticipating that maybe this is as good as it gets. That we talked about that a little bit as a task force as well, that we have been going round and round on this and trying to figure out a way to maximize the benefit to our students that need the most sleep as per science, and doing that with a minimal impact to the other students within the district as well as to the budget. Recognizing that this is a significant benefit, though 15 minutes doesn't sound like a lot. 75 minutes of sleep per week is significant, and like I said, up to 125 minutes for those that take the bus is significant. According to some of the experts on our task force, would really be impactful. So, yes, I think while we didn't vote, I think that the majority of the task force was happy to hear that this compromise could be a possibility.
Yeah, I agree. I think that part of what the task force has sort of backed into, 15 minutes of start time change for the high school does not sound a lot, but when you talk about sleep savings and when you begin to talk about, and I think part of the work that went into this particular suggestion is that there was no one big fix that provided a large chunk of time. There were a lot of small compromises. We are going to work on being more efficient with the bus runs. We're going to shorten our school day by a few minutes, and we're going to slide all schools back to some degree. From those three buckets and little amounts that come out of each of those buckets, you can generate up to 125 minutes of additional sleep for some students. And again, we do have to be careful about which minutes accrue to which students. Students who drive to school and students who take the bus to school will see different amounts of that value accrue to them. So I have said that after 4 or 5 years of talking about this topic, that this seems to me to be the best solution and the most palatable compromise that we have come up with to date. There is at this point no cost associated, no financial cost associated with that. Without a doubt, the compromise is that we will be doing nothing to improve an elementary school day that is probably already too late, and exacerbating that school day. And then we spent a lot of time talking about the 10 or the 5-minute difference. And Mr. Dorwin and I met again following the meeting and are assuming a very cautious position, and it goes back to some of the comments that I shared from Greenwich. If the board decides, in response to the concerns that we have heard, to make a 5-minute slide at the elementary level, we will do everything within our power to meet that expectation. However, bus runs are just funny, and I have to stop short of saying that I know we can meet that time frame until we have modeled it out. And whether it involves making some modifications after the school year has opened, whether it involves maybe putting another bus or two on the road, which would incur costs that we had tried, that's something we've tried to avoid, and that's not a budgeted cost. But the fact is, if the board decides that a 5-minute change is acceptable, we will do everything we can to meet that change. The elementary schools being the last run of the day certainly makes it the right place to be more aggressive if that's what you choose to do, because there won't be cascading effects. But I just need to be clear that we may have a school that dismisses at 3:30 And again, to some earlier comments, not be able to get all the buses to the school for pickup right at 3:30. We know that in most of our schools, there are 6 buses that come in. Most of them roll in at 3:25 or close to 3:25, but it's not unusual for 1 bus or 2 buses to be 10 or 15 minutes late. We may open the school year in that condition and have to work to correct that condition, and I can just assure the board that we will do everything we can to meet any benchmark that you set for us in those schedules.
To that last point, it would be very disruptive to move it 5 minutes now at the outset of the year, and then during the year move it another 5 minutes, say, based on all the information you have in front of you now and all the unknowables that you just pointed out. Would you be comfortable committing to holding the 3:30 as the time throughout the school year for the elementary's end time?
Absolutely. And the scrambling that we would be doing to adjust would not be in the bell time. It would be in finding ways to get 6 buses to every elementary school for that 3:30 dismissal. The worst case scenario would be that we dismissed the school at 3:30 and spend all year long with buses that are rolling in at 3:35 or 3:40. And again, you've heard 2 comments from early tonight that condition exists now in some cases. So it could be exacerbating that condition, but it is a piece of reality in bus service. You heard that if there's a hiccup in the high school bus run at 2:08, that cascades through our system, and we have buses that arrive late now. It wouldn't be unheard of. It might be more of that and this board is aware that the first 2 weeks of any school year, we're working out hiccups in our school. So it would be a more disruptive opening as we tried to see, does the new aggressive routing work? And if that new aggressive routing doesn't work, how do we tweak? How do we adjust? Now, we will have a new bus company. We will have a new routing software at our disposal. But I do think it means that Mr. Bowden and I are going to be doing more work. We will be asking the community to be a little more patient with us as we open that school year. And then to what we saw in Newtown and what we saw in Greenwich, does it mean having to add buses during the school year to facilitate the runs? I would have no plan of changing the school bell schedule during the school year. Like everything that we do, year 1 of any new program is going to be an implementation and learning year, and whether or not there would be changes or modifications in year 2, we will have to wait and see. But I don't think that, as long as I've worked with this board, that we've launched anything and not made improvements, upgrades, or modifications once we learned from that experience. And so that would certainly be part of this work moving forward into year 2 or 3.
And to that point, we actually did say, I mean, and obviously this is my, cup full of optimism talking, but we did talk about wanting, if we implemented this in year 1, that the goal might be to realize such great efficiencies with our new routing system and the new bus company and making various changes possibly with loading and unloading at the various schools, that we could work back towards a 9 o'clock start time in the following year.
So I will just start sort of the deliberation portion by saying I have significant concerns about the 10 minutes at the elementary schools. I wish we heard from more high school parents. And I realize that people that have the most concerns are generally the ones who get in touch with us. But we heard from elementary school principals, which we have to trust on the front line in the schools, and we heard from a significant amount of parents about the disruption and the concerns about getting home late and overextending 5 through 10-year-olds in their day. So I have significant concerns about making that kind of move. I'm curious about the 5 minutes. Curiously.
Yeah,
maybe skeptical, but curious about the 5 minutes as a potential compromise.
My concern is voting now for something that still has a certain degree of uncertainty, and I recognize, initially I was thinking perhaps we should wait until July until we got a better sense of the analysis around the efficiency, but from what you're describing, it sounds like we have to implement it, and that wouldn't happen until the next school year. So it's the uncertainties that gives me some apprehension. I certainly agree that, having heard from so many parents, that the 10 minutes would not be acceptable to me. If we were going to stay with the same ending time for the elementary school and hope for the efficiencies, I think perhaps while there's a degree of uncertainty there, then at least we're putting a stake in the ground that we're not going to make a significant change for the elementary schools.
So, I would be, we will work to achieve whatever this board puts in place. I am confident that should we agree to slide the elementaries 10 minutes, that we will have bus systems that work. And I understand that that's a compromise of 10 minutes at the elementary level to afford a benefit of 25 minutes at the high school. If we were to make a 5-minute slide, while I am pessimistic and worried and stressed about that, we would make every effort to make that work, up to and including adding unbudgeted buses to the routes if necessary. If the board suggested making the 25-minute change at the high school and holding the elementary times constant this year, I would have to say that I don't believe that is possible. And I would have to advise the board not to even entertain that option.
Dr. Freeman, do you think that, we spoke with transportation a little bit about this, and they're getting, starting to work in that new routing system. Do you think that within the next month they would have a stronger degree of confidence in, a 5-minute shift if they were able to really get in there and work out the routes over the next month?
We're going to come up with possibly. I mean, right now, we are rebuilding our routes in the new software. Mr. Dorwin began that work this weekend, so we're beginning to build our base routes. The more he comes to learn the new software, the more optimistic he becomes about working with that new software. But my understanding from both Mr. Dorwin, from Mr. Turner, from Specialty, and it's now been reinforced by the experiences both in Newtown and in Greenwich. Even when we have it on paper and we say, this is the new system, we've generated these efficiencies, and it will work, even if we had an expensive outside consultant who did the work for us, charged us, and delivered it to us, Greenwich then made it really clear that there is no software that will be completely accurate other than running the routes, loading kids, putting them on there, and experiencing variations in weather conditions. And so Greenwich very confidently said, we have it. They had an expert who stamped the report and said, here it is, and they watched those slip away. So again, I would just be cautious that I would be confident with 10 minutes. I would be dedicated, committed, and will work very hard to make 5 minutes work, but will sort of put the community on notice that we may require some patience and it might generate some frustration. And I would absolutely adamantly advise this board not to consider holding constant and trying to make a change of this magnitude. I believe that would set us up for failure.
Holding constant at the elementary
school.
school.
Elementary time and moving the high school.
All right, can I ask a question? Because I'm just trying to understand how the logistics here would work. The elementary dismissal is the last bus run of the day. If we're starting to have problems earlier in the day, does putting an extra bus on just for that run, does that solve?
Well, it would have to be 4.
No, and the analogy, right,
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not one bus, it's probably got to be 4.
It could, right, and the analogy that I've used is it goes to it's similar to the challenge of leveling classrooms at a grade level when you've got 4 discrete classrooms. We're running essentially 6 buses per elementary school. So if we just picked the longest elementary run, adding 1 bus would solve that problem because we'd be able to cut that run in half. But if we're trying to reduce all of our runs by 5 minutes, that's not easy to do by adding 1 bus to the system or even 1 bus per school.
Yeah, you don't need to to shorten
that's my
everyone by
problem.
5 minutes.
I
You
know.
need to
Right.
shorten the
The
longest
longest.
one or two or maybe
Yes.
3 by 5
Yeah.
minutes or 10 minutes or
Yeah.
whatever it happens to be.
The-
Right? I mean,
Yes,
that's
that's exactly right. The reality is, though, in the system we have now, we get 3 or 4 or 5 buses essentially on time to each elementary school, and then we have 1 or 2 or 3 that is a laggard in the current system. What we will be doing is we will be taking that window, shortening it by 5 minutes, and trying to improve that performance and certainly not degrade that performance. That's the challenge that Mr. Dorwin and Specialty will be working with. And if adding, right, if we start running that and see that we're meeting it at 3 schools but not 1, then maybe 1 bus would be all it would take. If it's 2 schools we're not meeting it, it would be looking at those late bus arrivals and seeing if we could insert a bus or a van or change, right? It's not even necessarily inserting, but if it's 1 bus that's late, could we move 2 or 3 drop-offs off of that bus? We've worked very hard in Guilford, especially at the elementary level, to never have students ride a different bus in the morning in the AM, simply because of the confusion. We may be making compromises in those areas, that in the afternoon, you're riding a different bus because that helps us to level those drop-off times. So Mr. Dorwin and Specialty have a very good understanding of the task. They just haven't been able to model it, and even once we model, won't know for sure until we run it.
My request for clarification is that this proposal that was received from Dr. Moore, was this a request by the start time committee to CHIP and to the bus company to find another 5 minutes? I guess I heard it. I heard it differently.
We asked during that meeting if there, out of concerns that we were
Right.
hearing from
Absolutely.
the elementary school parents, if there were any efficiencies to be had to actually, we started to keep the start time where it is.
Right.
And
For elementary.
Correct.
Right.
And through that discussion, Mr. Dorwin, as well as Specialty, thought that saying we would hold our start time at 9 o'clock would be worrisome, without knowing, how great the efficiencies are to be had, but that moving it 5 minutes is a possibility, so.
And I guess so I'm going to echo your question again, recognizing absolutely your answer, which is, and I get this, textbook doesn't equal real life, right? We know that in so many ways, but if this came up as an idea last week, is another 3 or 4 weeks some time to get a better sense from CHIP, or I guess it would be from CHIP, Dorwin, not from the bus company, right?
both.
Both? I mean, are they working together, I guess, in
They're
the
working
system?
hand in
but-
hand.
Working
They're
together,
being trained
yeah.
on the software, but Chip does most of our routing. We own that in-house rather than, but they're working with us and supporting us. It certainly wouldn't hurt.
I'm asking a question you can't fully answer. I get that.
Right.
But I think you're making,
I'm trying to decide whether we're
But I'm
trying to
still
make a
gonna-
decision right now, or whether we will have any more information if we try to buy another couple of weeks.
And what I will say, in 3 weeks, I might be answering, it does look pretty good on paper, but I still won't be confident
I
until we
understand,
write it
and you
out.
have the right, and you absolutely have the right. I guess the question is, do we? This is a new idea in the last week,
Yeah.
Right.
in a very complicated.
Well, and to the, obviously there is some significant public interest in this, and
Yes.
this is a new proposal.
Right.
And we haven't heard from anybody other than
Yeah.
Dr. Moore on this. And I think we have a practice here of not springing things on people. And this is, although I guess it may not rise to the level of springing, but it's nonetheless a new proposal. And I don't know what the impact is of 5 minutes on the elementaries. I am convinced from talking to members of the task force and some of the people that specialize in this. I have to look. We've all read the studies. We've all listened to the people that are the pediatricians and the people that specialize in this area. I'm convinced that point number one, that 15 minutes additional for the high school students is the minimum amount that really does any good. And it does, and apparently it does a surprising amount of good. So I'm willing to start there. That if we're going to do anything, we can't do 10 minutes at the high school or 5 minutes at high school. That's not accomplishing anything. I am convinced. I know that I've read the American Academy of Pediatrics report. They suggest that we start the high school at 8:30. It's not possible. It's simply not possible. Not with an active sports community, not with trying to have the instructional day anywhere close to what it is. In a perfect world where we have started off 100 years ago, starting at 8:30, maybe. But
Or if all our neighbors
the whole
were doing
state
this.
and if everybody in the whole state did it, it's just simply not possible. It's not an aspirational goal. It's not a practical goal. It's not a feasible goal. It's not an imaginary. It's not going to happen, period. I'm sorry. It would be great if it could. It's not. So we need to move past that. We've talked a little bit about the two-tier bus system, and I just want to say a couple of things about that. We don't have numbers on that, which is that is a piece of information that would be nice to have. However, having said that, we know it's going to be more expensive.
Yes.
It's going to be more expensive by probably about 50% because you're adding about 50% of transportation capacity. But I want to mention one other thing, and I think maybe this has been lost a little bit, or it hasn't been discussed anyway. Right now, the elementary bus runs are the shortest runs in the district because those are the elementary schools are the neighborhood closest thing we have to neighborhood schools. If we go to a two-tier bus system, every elementary run is going to include a drop-off at Baldwin. And so for some people, I don't know what order it would be in. Would it be Baldwin first in the elementaries? I don't know. We haven't
You'd
looked
have
at
to
that yet.
stagger it.
But that elementary bus run is going to, by definition, be longer. It's going to be more expensive, and it's going to be longer. Is that good? I don't know. I mean, that's just something that I think we really haven't focused on very much, and it's certainly not something that we'd be proposing anytime in the near future. But there is a collateral consequence. And there is a collateral consequence to everything that we've looked at, right? And I am absolutely convinced that there is no way to get 15 minutes extra to high school start times or later high school start times with no impact on anybody else. There just isn't a way to do it. I wish I've had some flattering emails like, you guys have done such a great job figuring stuff out. How come you can't figure this out? Because there isn't a solution that has no impact on somebody else. I can't say it any more clearly than that. So the question really, I think, boils down to two things. There's a practical question. How confident are you that if we move the high school 15 minutes and then the middle school 10 minutes and the elementary school 5 minutes, that it would work? Now, nobody's expecting 100%, but we expect good faith, and we expect that it's a reasonably achievable goal. I would be inclined. So anyway, that's one question. Mm-hmm. The second question is, what does the community think about that? Assuming that you're confident that we can do it, or the bus company is confident within the realm of reasonableness, but yep. This is not, nobody's proposed, I'm quite confident, knowing Dr. Moore as well as I know him, that he's not proposing that as a stalking horse to say, and plus it's not really going to matter anyway because we'll just get the buses there 10 minutes later anyway. I'm quite confident that is not what he's doing. That is absolutely not his MO. And then, the third question is, is this acceptable to the community, right? And we understand there's an impact on elementary kids and on elementary faculty. We understand that. But there's just not a way to get there without some impact on somebody. And it's very frustrating. We're very used to, in public education, we're very used to win-win. And this just is I don't see it. I don't see any way.
This one is cost benefit.
This one is that's exactly
yes,
right.
That's
exactly the way to look at it. Is the benefit from the extra time sleep for the high school students, does it outweigh the loss of some time for the elementary students? I haven't
Who
heard
will
so much
be
from the
eventual high school students.
Well, and I do, so it's not, when I imagine, having been there a while ago, when you're an elementary school parent, you're not thinking about what your kid's experience is in high school, right? Understandably. And I, at this point, am trying to remember in some ways what it was like when my kids were in elementary school. I find it not unreasonable, but perhaps unfortunate that this has turned into a high school student against elementary school student argument, at least in some of the dialogue I've heard. Because we're not doing this for the present high school students.
Right.
We're doing it for all of our children who eventually become teenagers and attend this school. And so I do think we need to pay attention to what this decision, how this decision impacts all the students at this time. And recognizing that, I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Bloss, it will have an impact. This will have an impact on other students, but I would like people to try to remember that this is a decision we're trying to make for all our students who will be in this high school at some point while they're members of our Guilford Public School community. And if you're a parent of a 5-year-old, I know it's hard to picture what it's like when your kid is 15 and totally exhausted by Friday morning. And I also know that not all 15-year-olds are experiencing this the same way. But I continue to struggle with the fact that we have we have science telling us what the right thing to do here is. And we're trying to do it not just for the present 1,100 kids in the school, but we're trying to do it for all the kids in this system. It's just that some of them aren't going to get the impact for another 10 years.
Immediately. And Mr. Bloss, I would venture to answer your questions at least from the educator perspective, right? We have heard our principals comment on taking what is already a late elementary school and moving it 10 more minutes. So 5 minutes is less bad than 10. I think that people would recognize the attempt to be responsive to the concerns, but I don't think that they would categorize it yet as a neutral or a positive. It continues to be a cost, but if what we are looking at is a cost-benefit analysis, reducing that cost by half is a significant move. What we buy for that is we buy some liabilities. We buy administrative and public relations and possibly financial liability in not knowing for sure if we'll be able to meet that commitment, at least not immediately. And so we would buy some administrative time and effort and energy in correcting that if we don't open school properly. We will buy some PR exposure in that we will publish a schedule. Fairly confident, but I can't tell you that I'm reasonably or highly confident that it will work until we see it running, just because I know we're not meeting the current schedule and we're exacerbating that. And then we would buy some possible financial liability. And so is that liability worth reducing the cost to increase the ratio benefit? I think that it's See, I would suggest it's not even a new proposal. I would suggest it's a response to what we heard from the community. It's a modification to the existing proposal in response to the group that we did hear come out and speak. And while I'm nervous and stressed and anxious about the liability, I absolutely understand the reason for weighing that. We talked about it at significant length at the task force meeting, and I continue to believe that this is the best compromise that we have been able to put together to date. And we have spent 5 years talking about this topic in this school district, while I will remind you, continuing to run every other aspect of this school system. We haven't dropped our other concerns, and we haven't seen drop off in performance. But we've put a significant amount of time and energy into this, and to Mr. Bloss's point, I don't know that we're going to find a better plan by continuing to return to the drawing board. When you look at sleep savings, this is over 2 hours a week of sleep savings for what we are discussing as a possible 5-minute exacerbation of an already late day. I will never call it a minor inconvenience. It exacerbates a day that's already late, but that is the cost value analysis that is being placed in front of us as a leadership team.
To your point, that this is probably the best that we're going to see. I'm one of the new members on the board, and I was on the task force also. And I was under the assumption that, well, let's do something now, but we're going to do something really substantial next year. again, that was naive on my part. So what I'm hearing is that this is probably going to be it. And, you know, I was concerned about implementing it now if we were going to do something next year, and then that would be a disruption in implementing one thing and then changing it the following year. So I could support the 5 minutes, but again, with the uncertainty, I think I would struggle on supporting the proposal indicating 10 minutes with the hope of finding 5 minutes.
So I want to be really clear that I'm speaking as the superintendent and as an individual and not speaking for the task force on this. There has been a lot of conversation about whether this is part one of a two-part plan. I believe, and a lot of this has, I voiced this concern at the last task force meeting, so I'm not at all concerned about saying it out loud here, but it has continued to grow over the last 2 weeks since that public hearing. I would believe that if we were to implement the changes you are discussing it tonight, particularly if we're looking at a 5-minute change, which we know is going to create challenges, that I would think this board would have to say that this is the change and put a year or a 2-year hold on this topic and simply monitor that change. Look for impact, look for what's working, but if we were to make a change of this magnitude this year and say we might be doing something of equal or greater magnitude or even in the other direction next year, I believe that we would exacerbate. I don't think that the community has the patience for that. I do think the community understands that we make changes and then we study those changes, and sometimes we have to refine and modify those changes. But I would think, and this goes against the recommendation or the suggestion that you received from the task force, but as an individual and as your superintendent, and I've come to be more strong on this over the last 2 weeks, while I'm saying that I'm concerned and stressed and worried, if we make a 5-minute change, we will work we'll do our level best to make that work and to make that possible and to make that a positive. But I think that you then have to allow this community at least a year or 2 years to come to terms with that change, to allow us to observe that change, to go out and poll families and find out if they're seeing a positive benefit, at least anecdotally from that, and not say that this is year one of a 2-year plan and we haven't even started to sketch out what year 2 is going to look like yet, because those are big unknowns right now if we were to try to make another big move, to Mr. Bloss's point, to get closer to 8:30.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's very irresponsible to think that we could do something and then there's another phase in a year, because we took 5 years to get to this.
Well,
and I feel like probably maybe this might be all we can come up with, and it's going to take a year to really fully implement it and tweak it and see how we're doing. I think you need another year to see the effect it's having. 1 year isn't enough.
The only other achievable mechanism that I can see is going to 2 tiers of buses.
Right.
I mean, that's going to be.
Yeah, and I do just want to add, I did speak to Nate Levinson of DMG this afternoon. He and Mr. Dorwin and I have scheduled a conference call. The individual, Peter Gilchrist, who wrote our report, is no longer with DMG, but Nate is revisiting those numbers, looking at the calculations. So we will go back and look at that. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is it's going to be north of 300,000 because that was the ballpark before the contract increase. And we will work on on looking at those numbers and understanding those numbers with a fresher perspective. And we will do that, but I can't tell you anything more specific tonight that's going to impact this discussion around that.
Well, I get a chance to get a approximate percentage of our population at each level that's ridership of the buses.
No more accurate than we had discussed previously, but at the high school, you're looking at roughly 40 to 50% of students who don't ride the bus, 50 to 60% who do. You could almost say it's half and half. At the middle schools and high schools, that's a higher percentage. We might have 75% of our students riding the buses. I did look to find those rider surveys and was unable to produce those this morning. I apologize, but we can look to have those. It's not 100% at any level. It may be 70% at the highest, and it dwindles down to about 50% at The high school. And that is a benefit to us, because if we had higher rider percentage, we would either need longer bus runs or a lot more buses on the road. I know that people see buses that are underfilled, but that's the only way that we can provide bus runs that are between 30 and 50 minutes. If we filled our buses, rides would be over an hour in this community.
Yeah, and just putting more kids on the bus doesn't, it makes the buses fuller, but it makes the runs 20 or 30 minutes longer. So you could remove buses, but then you'd be defeating the purpose of trying to start later. And
well, right. So if school starts 10 minutes later, but all your bus runs get 10 minutes longer, then we have defeated our own purpose.
Right.
Correct.
You also need to recognize that there may be some additional ridership due to the change, and you wouldn't want to remove buses or pare down buses if, without anticipating that some students may say, oh, I have 10 more minutes or
a lot of
whatever
parents and students drive because it affords them more sleep, and if the changes provide for that, yes, you may increase ridership.
I think that I went to the meeting Monday night, and I'm not convinced yet either way if it's appropriate to vote on something tonight. But what I did hear from Mr. Dorwin and the bus company in terms of us getting more information or not getting more information is that the issue is that the bus runs aren't done yet. And we have kids moving in, kids moving out, kindergartners moving in, moving out, which are the single stops. Right. So the bus runs aren't done, and they're not going to be done in 3 weeks.
No. Again, we're with a new company, we're with a new software. The analogy I used at the transportation the start time meeting was it's as if you bought a new phone, and after you purchased it, they told you that they can't transfer your contact list over. So we are rebuilding that contact list by scratch because we were unable to import it from the previous software system. And you're right, the buses are never done. They're constantly changing because somebody new moves into town or somebody moves out of town. We change every year because the kindergarten addresses change. It's always a work in progress. We are routing now. We are impressed by the new software. So to a degree, we are cautiously optimistic that this will provide us opportunities that we had not had before. But whether that results in a few minutes or 5 minutes or better management, but it doesn't turn into time, we just don't know yet.
And we might not know in time.
The Greenwich conversation really struck me as a cautionary tale. They thought they had the savings, they advertised the savings, and then they gave them away in practice.
If we do treat this, as we often do, as a receive item, though there's nothing we've received a lot. But we don't act on it. We act on it next month. Just tell us about any difficulties that would present, pros and cons of implementing in July instead of June.
Considering the nature of this change, since all of the schools remain in the current order, and since what we're talking about is whether or not the schools are sliding 15 minutes, 10 minutes, or 5 minutes, the greatest downfall to not taking action tonight is our ability to lay this conversation to rest with the community. The communications around what your bus stop will be and what time your bus will be there, right? We're talking about the difference between your bus stop moving 10 minutes or moving 5 minutes or not moving at all. The reality is that some people in the community have those changes every year. If you had a kindergartner in your home this year, the bus came to your house and was there at a certain time. Next year, unless you have a younger one, if that student is going to be in first grade, your bus stop and time are going to be changed because the bus is no longer coming to the bottom of your driveway. If you live near a kindergartner, you might be experiencing that same change. So the downside exposure is that we will keep this conversation alive in our community for another month until your next regular meeting.
I'm not sure that's a downside.
No, but and people won't receive communications about whether their bus stop includes a change in Bell's schedule until that time. There is a complication in that I'm currently scheduled to be in D.C. that evening, and I need to remind the board of that.
I'm sure you wouldn't mind missing another meeting on start times. I'm just guessing.
I might want to Skype in, if possible. This is a big decision for this community, and I don't know if I've facilitated the conversation, but I've at least been involved in it for 4 years.
Absolutely
so-
correct. No, I'm being flipped. So I'll tell you, I mean, where I am, just to be honest with everybody, I'm inclined to support this because I think it's as reasonable as we can get.
As it's going to get.
And I agree with the comment that I don't see doing anything else, at least
For a while. Yeah.
However, I recognize that this is new. It is somewhat new. It's a modification of the last proposal, and I don't want to cut anybody off and feel like you weren't heard on this particular proposal from Dr. Moore. And I think you have a right to give input on it. The second issue is whether we can be. My hesitation is the same thing that you're saying, and you're being very clear about. Look, I can't give you the same level of confidence that this would work as a 10-minute delay in the elementary schedule would work. But I would hope that we would have at least a little better information if we took this up in July, to give people an opportunity to give us input and to see what Mr. Dorwin can tell us. Because look, if Mr. Dorwin, here's my hesitation. If Mr. Dorwin says, look, we've now run, and it's not all of the runs, it's the middle run.
Right.
We don't need to know the high school run. That's the middle run, because that's the one that feeds into the elementary in the morning.
Right.
So, and in the afternoon for that matter. So if Mr. Dorwin prioritized that and said, look, I think that this is achievable, I'm recognizing that we get that there, that the caveats and the wrinkles and the fallen trees and the rest of it, fine. But that it's real. Because the one thing I don't think we can do is that if we say we're going to adopt Dr. Moore's proposal, and then when the implementation phase comes, it just doesn't work. Because then what we've done is we've backed into a 10-minute later start time, either accidentally or whatever.
School dismisses at 3:30, but their bus runs get you the effect of the 10-minute delay anyway.
So that doesn't work.
Or, in order to respond to that, everything gets pushed back and we've just lost some of the bus time we've saved the high school kids at the beginning.
Right. So, I don't feel compelled. I mean, I want to make clear, I would be inclined to support this with the two, subject to hearing from the community and subject to hearing from Mr. Dorwin. But I don't, unless there's a huge implementation problem, if we voted, and the board may not vote for it, I don't know. But that we just continue this to July and take it up then.
I agree. I think that there's no need to rush to judgment here. We are talking about a new proposal. We had this meeting where 30 or 50 people came and talked to us about their views on this very complicated subject, and now we've changed the proposal. I think we owe it to the community to allow them to absorb the new proposal, and we need to get some feedback from the community. I instinctively feel that 15 minutes change for the high school students traded against 5 minutes change for the elementary students sounds like a more fair deal than what we had before. But I don't have an elementary student, so I can't speak for that group. But the other thing that taking more time on this would help with is we're asking you to make some assumptions when your staff really hasn't had a chance to do the work. And I'm not sure that's fair. And I think that if we wait a month, we may know a lot more about how this is going to work. One of the things I'm concerned about is that if it turns out that this thing isn't working as well as we hoped. The question is, how do we solve that problem? And it sounds easy to say, well, we'll put an extra bus in there, but it's not clear that that really is the solution. And I think we need to give the bus company and Mr. Dorwin some time to think through what the options would be. In other words, if at this school the bus is going to, two of these buses are going to be late, what's the answer? And I don't know what that is. And I
You know what the
suspect
answer is until you know what the problem is.
I was just going to say.
And
No,
so
but I mean,
it could be,
but
it could
there-
be shifting 3 kids from one run to a bus to another
it could
bus.
be,
Could
all
be
right.
adding a bus.
But to try and pin down the superintendent now, when he really hasn't had a chance to even work through any of these things, I think is unfair.
Right, and I just want, and I appreciate that, and I just want to be cautious. We'll certainly know more in 3 weeks.
We won't
Yeah.
have the
I'm
answer.
not sure we'll know a lot more. We might only know a little bit more, and it will always be speculation until we load those buses with students and run it. So, right. So, I'm being really careful
Right,
to say
but
I'm
one of-
fairly confident. I don't know if I'll move from fairly to reasonably in 3 weeks, but I'll work on it.
All right. There but- will be but- an adverb. But one of the things that we need to know is, what is the associated cost with some of these, some of these fixes?
In very rough numbers, remember that any bus is going to be roughly $50,000. And so
Full
if-
size.
Right, any
Yeah.
full-size bus
Yeah.
for a full year will run. So if we're talking about possibly
But
having.
that's assuming it runs 3 runs.
Correct.
And so, I mean, it's more complicated
Yes, it
than
is.
that. And so, and as Mr. Bloss points out, that's for a full-size bus, and maybe, this solution can be solved with a van, or I don't know. The computer may tell us some of this, but, if it's an additional bus for each of the 4 elementary schools, that's $200,000. That's
Right.
not a small sum
No,
of
exactly
money.
right. That was the point I was going to make.
And we don't, we went through some very, very difficult times trying to find $250,000 when the Board of Finance plucked it out of our pocket. And in the middle of the year to come up with a $200,000, that's going to be real tough.
That was exactly the point that I was going to make.
I'm concerned about that. So I'd like to have at least a better idea of what some of these financial parameters might look like, because I wouldn't want to be in the middle of the year and find out that we're that big a hole. Because the budget for the coming school year is tight, and we don't have that kind of a, cushion built in.
So does anybody feel differently? Nobody's made a motion, so
No, I'm fine waiting. My gut is that we're not going to have much more information in 3 to 4 weeks, but I'm fine to wait.
We're not going to have
We'll
less.
have
We're not going to have
some.
less, that's right. Let's be positive.
We'll have some.
and we'll be able to hear from the community.
Right.
That's the other thing. I mean, this
And
isn't-
which this is in response to.
Right.
It's a tweaking of the original proposal to accommodate some of the outcry we heard from the elementary parents.
So let me, I think I can make this commitment on behalf of the board, given that the July meeting is 6 weeks out from the start of the school year. If there is going to be a change in start times for 2018-19, it will be voted on at the July meeting. This is not going to be something that is going to continue to be postponed. It can't be.
I agree with that.
But that's, I think it's reasonable to do that tonight. And
Sure.
And just for clarification, that's July 9th.
That's
Here,
July 9th.
here,
July
in this
9th,
room at 7:30.
Correct.
And I'm
The
starting.
meeting starts at 7:30.
I'm starting a very difficult trial the next day, so everybody take it easy on me, all right?
Unless I'm on the other side.
No, you're not. Okay, all right, well, thank you. That's item 9.7. So then we'll go back to the agenda. 9.1 is to act on personnel items. There are 4 retirements. Rita Cody, library media specialist at Adams, 26 years of service.
Wow.
Patricia Ryan, elementary teacher at Baldwin, 16 years of service. Patricia Morico, speech language pathologist, 11 years, and at Baldwin, and Teresa Garceau, library media specialist at LEAP, 21 years. So is there a motion to ratify those resignations for the purpose of retirement?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'm sure, Dr. Freeman, you'll note our thanks.
Absolutely will.
So half of our elementary librarians are open. Okay, then there are 2 resignations. Susanna Bryan, orchestra music teacher at the high school, 9 years of service, and Jules Lefebvre, middle school, Adams Middle School French teacher, 1 year of service. A motion to ratify those resignations.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
9.2 is to act on revisions to the science curriculum. We did have a very thorough presentation about that last time. We are teaching evolution, I noticed.
Absolutely.
in the new curriculum, the proposed new curriculum, and I know that this has been a lot of the staff and the faculty and the administration have worked very hard on this proposal. Do you want to add anything, or? Yeah, I mean, it's up to you. We obviously heard from you last month. Okay. Okay, so.
Defense rests.
Yeah. Well, look, I think, it's been a terrific effort, and want to thank really everybody who worked on that committee. I know it's a lot of work.
Absolutely.
But, the results that we've seen when we've done curriculum changes speak for themselves. So we want to thank you all. Thank you for that. Is there a motion to ratify those revisions to the science curriculum?
I'll move it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, well, with our thanks, you have your new science curriculum.
Good work.
9.3 is to receive, only receive a textbook recommendation. It's a history textbook. I just had it. Where'd it go?
The West and New History.
History, first edition.
Excellent. First edition. The West, a New History for 12th grade, correct? Yes.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us anything about this?
This textbook request is for the ECE, World Civilizations course for 12th graders, which is the early college experience. It is a program that we do in conjunction with the University of Connecticut. We purchased world history textbooks last year after our social studies revision, and UConn is purchasing this new book, which is just now, publication date is July 2018, and in order to be in line, with that course, we felt that this would be a good book. I've reviewed it myself. There are a lot of new things. It doesn't look like an old college text. There's a lot of diary entries in here. There's a lot of journals, primary sources. And it does have a big electronic component with Quizlets and other e-resources that goes with it. So that's what we're thinking. This is just for a receive item. We'll keep it on display for the next month, but it is only for the 12th grade early college experience Western Civilizations course.
Available at Lathrop between.
Right, it'll be available at the Board of Education offices during business hours if anyone wants to go look at it. The cost of it would be a total of $4,004, I'm sorry. And that would include 5 years of, 6 years of access to the electronic resources. That's interesting. So they're trying to do a hybrid, traditional textbook and electronic smart.
We're going to actually reduce that amount a little bit. There are 14 students in the course right now. We're going to plan for 22. The original request came for 28. But we believe that the course is going to grow. We have a new teacher. We have a new syllabus. And we think it's going to grow. If it grows more than 22, of course, the school can purchase additional books.
Right.
But for right now, we're going to purchase 22.
All right, so that would knock the cost down by about
to $3,146 total.
But just to clarify your comment, this is the course the book for the course. If we want to keep it an ECE
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
We can keep an ECE course with our syllabus, with all of the resources. UConn doesn't say, oh, and you have to buy our book,
Oh, okay.
or you have to
I mean, I
do
wouldn't
these
find that
other-
completely unreasonable if
No,
it was
but we
a
won't, right.
But they
UConn
don't.
course.
They
It's a
don't.
decision.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't.
Yeah, no, I think I don't have any precedent for us saying, wow, you guys chose a lousy textbook. No, but I'm just trying to clarify that point.
Yep.
It's
Okay.
not, they don't put pressure on districts. They're not going to say, if you can't afford this
Oh,
textbook,
okay,
then you
no, that's a
can't
good,
be an E
that's a,
ECE.
that's a perspective I
Yeah.
didn't think of. Okay,
And,
terrific.
but we reviewed it, and the school is recommending it, and I think in light of our new curriculum and the resources available with that book, I would support their request.
It's 850 pages. I mean, it's a real book.
Goes up to 2017.
The freshest history available.
Very good.
Okay, so we'll carry that over to the July agenda then,
Mm-hmm.
and that gives you enough time.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda, item 9.4, is to review a proposed $11,000 donation from the Guilford Foundation for 4 grant awards. $3,600 to the Guilford High School Environmental Club to install water bottle refill stations, $5,000 to the Guilford High School Music Boosters to purchase LED lights, $1,373 to the Guilford High School Science Olympiad team to participate in the Science Olympiad, and $1,027 to James Hyman for the Ethan Song Memorial Spike Ball Tournament. So is there a motion to approve those grants?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, well, I'm sure we'll do a letter of thanks to the Guilford Foundation. That's very generous.
Absolutely, and I would just note that the Guilford Foundation, in collaboration with the high school administration, allows students to be part of the decision-making process and how those funds are distributed. And so the uses you see in front of you included student participation in identifying those uses, and we're, one, very appreciative of the award, and two, very proud of the process that's been put in place to allow student voice.
Okay, thank you. So item 9.5 is to act on budget transfers for fiscal year 2017-18. That's the current fiscal year budget. We did get some special ed tuition bills in that were not anticipated, and actually a little bit of a result of Ms. Trudeau shaking the vendors up to make sure they got their bills in before the end of the fiscal year. But because of that, we are going to need to transfer $400,000 from the salaries line to the special ed tuition line. There is also a proposal that we transfer $903,714 from the medical line to the pension line in light of the status of the pension fund and in light of the status of the medical fund. So is there a motion to approve those transfers in the 17-18 fiscal year?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? This is just something we have to do whenever we move among the 7 subcategories in the budget. State law says that we have to approve the budget transfers. It's not any additional spending. 9.6 is to act on budget transfers for fiscal year 2018-19. We talked about that in operations, and I think the feeling was that we're not even in 18-19 yet. There's no reason to do that now. We should just keep in mind that we may need to do budget transfers as the year moves on and act accordingly. So that we can table 9.6. 9.7 we've done. 9.8 is to act on recommendations from the Policy Committee regarding graduation requirement policy and regulation.
Yes. So graduation requirements, the policy 6310 was brought to the board last month as a receive item. The policy committee is going to ask that the board act on the changes to the graduation requirement policy, which in this case are on the first page, striking out language regarding assessments that in this policy are particularly specific in order to simply identify that all students must participate in statewide mastery examinations, which will allow for changes that happen at the state level so that we don't have to change this policy every time. So I am making a motion that the board accept changes to the graduation requirements policy 6310.
Second that.
Any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Okay. And then the graduation requirements regulation comes with a few more detailed changes that the policy committee is asking the board to accept. The first is that it simply, on the first page, removes language relevant to graduation requirements that will end with the graduating class this year. Several years ago, the policy committee and then subsequently the board voted for changed, enhanced graduation requirements that our freshmen, sophomores, and juniors are experiencing now. So it simply strikes that language. On page 2, echoing the changes to the policy, it updates assessment requirement language, but most significantly on page 3, the proposed change coming from Guilford High School administration is to strike the requirement or strike the practice of reporting the decile rank, so a high school student's rank on the transcript. It would be, again, available to any colleges that still require it. At this point, our understanding is that's fewer than 9% of colleges are even looking at that number.
Or scholarship applications.
Excuse me?
Or scholarship
Or scholarship,
applications that
right,
require
exactly.
it.
We will certainly be able to identify valedictorian, salutatorian, but that this would, I think as we noted when we talked about this last month, does a couple of things, hopefully reduces some stress, takes away a number that for which particular students might be literally hundredths apart, 0.001 from each other, so was somewhat misrepresentative. So the policy committee and the members of the Guilford High School administration who came to us are asking the board to adopt the changes in this regulation.
Another simple addition is AP has
Oh,
now
thank you,
a
yes.
/AP and IB.
Right, thank you, yes. So IB has now been identified in the quality points chart. Thank you. So I am making a motion that the Board of Ed accept the recommendations of the policy committee to make these changes.
Second.
Any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
All right, committee reports, item 10, policy committee, anything else going on?
The policy committee is scheduled to meet June 25th. Unfortunately, I'm going to be away, Mr. Bone is going to be away, so several.
Also be away.
Oh, so most of the policy committee will not be present. So we will, in fact, be rescheduling that meeting to accommodate the members, but that will also be a posted meeting because it is a public meeting. So we will be rescheduling that likely in July because we have work to do to finish up policies and regulations that we have been monitoring over the last couple of months and to identify anything that might have come out of the legislative session that we need to address prior to September.
Okay, operations committee, anything else you want to?
No, lots of projects getting set to happen for the summer to the facilities. I think most of the other stuff that we discussed during our meeting, we've already discussed here at this meeting. So.
Curriculum committee?
We met the end of May, and Mr. Kevin Buno, high school teacher, came and did a presentation on the IB course, The Theory of Knowledge, and it was excellent, very knowledgeable.
The town committee liaisons, anything else, anything going on for, you might mention that the Standing Fields Committee is still working on the turf field issue.
Yes, the turf field issue is no closer to resolution. As expected, all the vendors are blaming each other.
But not us.
But at the moment, we do not have an agreement among the vendors as to what the solution to this is. There is an agreement about a temporary fix, but that doesn't interest us because if at the end of the next winter we've got the same problem, this just isn't worthwhile. So We are continuing to press. This is a very difficult issue, and I would stress to the public that this field is closed for safety reasons. The underlying pad, which provides the buoyancy if you step down on the field, has tears and holes in it, and that are not visible through the carpet. And so somebody coming onto that field could well injure themselves by stepping into one of these holes. And so I would once again say the field may look like you could go out and play on it, but it is not safe at the moment, and I would strongly recommend nobody use it until we've had a chance to have the proper work done.
Okay, good, thank you. Learn Board of Directors, have we missed the last couple, I think?
So I think we've missed the last couple Board of Directors meetings. I do continue to attend the Executive Committee meetings and was recently invited to deliver a keynote to their administrative retreat, and enjoyed the work, and a couple of the principals have asked if they could do some collaborative work with our schools here in Guilford. So continue to have a good and continuing relationship with Learn.
I'll be attending this
Great.
Thursday's meeting.
Okay, we'll look forward to hearing
Thank
how I do. Okay, item 11, public questions. Anybody? Sure. Yeah, just
watch the cord.
Watch the wire.
Hi, I'm Barbara Hargraves, and I live at on Landon's Way. So I have a question, but first I wanted to just thank you guys for postponing the vote, because I think it is allowing for much more transparency and for more people to, review the new plan, the 5-minute change of the elementary school. But I had a question. Have you considered, I know that in Greenwich they did a survey before and after they switched the time at the high school. Have you considered doing something, I mean, not hiring a consulting company and going quite to that expense, but I was thinking that wouldn't it be great to do a survey, something just as informal as, hey, to the high school kids, maybe to Adams, what time are you getting to bed? What time do you get up? And then after the change is implemented, what time are you getting to bed? Just so that you can see the change. I don't know who to bring that to. I don't.
You've done it.
Yeah, I did.
You brought it to the right people.
It's not a bad idea. Because one of the things we've found is that the districts that have done this are not measuring. There's no real.
We need something measurable.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how.
accurate.
How
valid but it is something to see.
Yeah. I think it would be something to just say, hey, this is what's actually happening.
Right.
Look what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay. That was all I was
Okay.
Thank you. I was thinking about that the other day, and I was like, oh, I should have brought that up. And I was sitting here now. I should bring that up.
It's a good suggestion.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Okay. So the next item on the agenda is an executive session to begin the discussion about Dr. Freeman's evaluation, which is something that we have to do by law once a year. And so we're going to start that this evening. Is there a motion to go into executive session for that purpose?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. What that means is we're going to go into a side meeting. It's not open to the public, or a side room. It's not open to the public. We will be adjourning. We will be coming out of executive session only for the purpose of adjourning the meeting. There will be no further public votes this evening. So with that, we are now in executive session. Thank you. I want to thank everybody who came out, too, by the way. I know that this is important.
Yeah, we can use the back corner there.
You want to do that one?
Sure.
Or